Hello and welcome to this special year-end edition of The Firm, in which we look back and we look ahead, not just to the next year, but to the next 15, because CNBC TV18 celebrates 15 years of leadership this December. So on the show, we asked 15 of the country's top lawyers, regulatory experts, accountants and auditors to identify the top 15 changes that India will and should witness in the next 15 years. Let the crystal ball gazing begin.
In 2009, India witnessed its biggest ever corporate fraud. 5 years hence, the Satyam saga has yet to reach conclusion in court. But it's left its mark on the most important law for business. When the 58-year-old Companies Act was rewritten, it included several anti-Satyam safeguards. The Companies Act 2013 rotates auditors and independent directors and gives minority shareholders a powerful veto on related party transactions. But eminent lawyer Cyril Schroff says the law falls short in many other areas. For instance, financial instruments.
I think that we currently suffer from woefully inadequate options for instruments, financial instruments that could be. It's just very binary almost. There is so much variety that is possible in different types of capital as well as debt. We currently don't have that, and in a high growth economy where you're going to see different shades and pools of capital coming in, financing our growth, you need those instruments, and you need markets for those instruments as well. Where are those markets and where are those instruments? It's too plain vanilla. Yes, there are risks involved the moment you try to make variety of, you try to sort of evolve sophistication, but that's all solvable. So I think if you're taking a 10-15 year view, much more sophistication and variety of instruments is something which is required. And lastly, I think the market for corporate control needs to be significantly deepened, and much more options should be available. There is practically no market today, as I said, and in the next 10-15 years, if we don't see more M&A, public M&A, potentially hostile M&A, you will not really force the governance debate, nor will you provide for really value creation through having better governance takeovers.
The last 15 years marked the birth of Indian multinationals. The Tata Group has been one of India's most aggressive deal makers over the last 15 years. From Tetley to Jaguar Land Rover, the Tatas have bought it all. Group General Counsel Bharat Vasani had a ringside view of all the action, and now he hopes India brings the M&A pie home.
I would like to see leverage buyouts permissible under Indian regulations. Why one needs to go to London to do a leverage buyout? Why not we do it in India? I would like to also see a lot of decriminalization of offences which are currently made criminal under the Companies Act. There was some beginning made in the 2013 Act, but not adequate enough. So I would want more and more corporate technical offences are decriminalized and substantial fines are levied, but people are not put to jail. I would also like to see much better corporate insolvency law which deals with smoother and easier exit of companies which have failed in business.
In the last 15 years, India saw the introduction of a codified takeover regulation and its rewriting. Thresholds went up and promoter premiums went down to zero. The buyback regulations were amended twice, and delisting norms are awaiting their third iteration. But top investment banker Saurav Malik says we still have a long way to go.
I think one of the key things which acquirers have been looking for in the Indian market, which are different from other markets, is when they really take control or there is a change of control of a company, the ability to directly go ahead pursuant to that change of control, delist the company if they so desire, and thereafter have a process which really allows them, subject to appropriate safeguards and thresholds, to really squeeze out minority shareholders. So that's something that is, I think, very, very important. And having a streamlined process which allows acquirers to really do this while keeping in the interest the minority shareholders' interests is something that's important. And I think over the next 10 odd years, that is something that regulators should jointly think about.
Speaking of retail shareholders, India Inc.'s relationship with the minority has undergone a transformation. No more the bhajan and poetry-filled shareholder meetings of the past. Today, minority shareholders are voting down related party transactions, deciding executive remuneration and blocking devious schemes. Why? Even mutual funds have found a voice. Adding to the chorus are India's new proxy advisory firms giving corporate governance a new fillip. Founder Anil Singhvi of IIAS is leading the charge.
Unless and until we have very robust class action suit which empowers the common shareholder that he or she can sue the independent directors, and for that we must have a very high regulatory network and framework which is supportive from both from SEBI's perspective and from the Companies Act. That class action suit should become like how they are in America. Anyone before committing this kind of act of cruelty, if I may use the word, against the minority shareholders, would think 10 times before committing those actions. So I think these are the two very important factors, that how you can take the willful defaulter out and how you can really empower the common shareholder that he can sue the directors of any negligence, misconduct on the boardrooms.
Not everybody is enthused by that idea. Leading corporate lawyer Zia Modi says India has already gone too far in its expectations from independent directors. She hopes the next 15 years will bring a balance to the boardroom.
In a situation where many companies are facing issues of commercial kickbacks, other types of fraud, I think the directors are, and I'm not saying it's wrongly, but are getting extremely skittish about their level of responsibilities, especially the independent directors. So exactly how to run this process and to allay the fears of the independent directors that they will not get caught in the crossfire is one issue. The next issue, of course, is the continuing anxiety of the high level of obligations of directors across the board. As I have been saying, you have to make the independent directors feel that they will not constantly be looked at with a 20/20 hindsight.
One of the biggest regulatory changes in the last 15 years was the shift from MRTPC to CCI. The 2002 Competition Act replaced the 30-year-old Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Commission. Barely had companies come to grips with the creation of the Competition Commission of India, the CCI introduced merger controls. Big penalties, taking on public sector monopolies, dawn raids, and this year, its first structural remedy. CCI is growing up fast. But competition lawyer Pallavi Shroff hopes for more clarity as the regulator comes of age.
There are certain areas where maybe alignments may be necessary with the SEBI takeover code, its timelines versus what the Competition Commission requires. There are other guidelines of SEBI that need to be complied with. I think that's sort of a fine-tuning and tweaking so that all these things can work in harmony. Today, the capital markets is sort of, look at the stock exchange, the trades at the stock exchange. The Sensex is fairly high, probably highest than what we've seen in the last several years. And there's a lot of trade that's happened, a lot of block deals that are happening, a lot of bulk deals that are happening. Do we need to keep coming back to the Commission for every bulk before we do every bulk deal or every block deal? Is that a possibility? What happens? Does it lead to price manipulations? How does it all work out? This is what I think I would urge the Commission to sort of understand more closely from the business, the challenges that the business is facing.
There's a new watchdog in the making for the audit profession as well. That's because India produces the maximum number of accountants in the world, but leaves them to self-regulate. The ICAI's failure are partly why auditors today are grappling with rotation and restriction on non-audit services. Well-known auditor P.R. Ramesh says more changes are on the anvil.
When I look ahead, I think the entire concept of an annual audit with an annual report few months after the year end with an annual general meeting becomes irrelevant. Because if you are able to get financial information onto your handheld device on a real-time basis, just like you get cricket match scores today, I
belief that the annual requirements will become irrelevant. Therefore, the audit will have to virtually be on a real-time basis. An audit has to be significantly systems-based or technology-driven, because what an auditor would then need to focus on is the underlying technology which produces the results. It will also mean that a lot of auditors' judgment will be replaced by technology. Reporting is going to move away from financial reporting to integrated reporting, which will include a lot of non-financial reporting. And that would mean areas like environment, areas like carbon credit, for example, and all other matrices which are non-financial. And that would mean the composition of an audit team, the auditor's skill sets will be different from what it is today.
Soon, India will also have an audit super regulator. That same body will also determine accounting standards. If the ICAI is facing a reinvent or perish dilemma, Indian accounting standards are also at an existential crossroad. Will India finally make it to IFRS country?
In the first phase, we'll like certain listed companies and certain unlisted companies to follow the Ind AS, and then in 2017, that's effective one for 2017, some of the more listed entities and some of the more unlisted entities will be covered therein. And maybe an year later, or maybe in the same year, I can't say right now, probably the banks and the insurance companies, the non-banking financial companies will also be covered. Once we are going to bring in IFRS equivalent standards in the name of Ind AS, certain changes in the direct taxes or certain changes in the indirect taxes will have to be brought in. I think when I talked of 2010, 2011, when we wanted to really bring in Ind AS at that particular point of time, if we didn't succeed, one of the reasons was that industry was not prepared for it. Though the profession as such was not lagging behind and profession wanted to go ahead, but at that time industry had its own apprehension so far as the direct taxes were concerned, and the apprehension was well founded. Let me also say that one thing, because industry felt that there could be certain gains based upon the fair valuation which the income tax authorities would like to tax, but then those fair valuation losses they may not like to allow. I think this is one of the major challenges.
Coming up on the firm, the crystal ball gazing for changes in corporate finance, securities law, tax and the judiciary.
Welcome back. You're watching a special edition of The Firm. Now, India's equity markets tell the story of India Inc. rather well. In 15 years, the market capitalization of the Indian equity markets has grown from around 10 lakh crore rupees to 100 lakh crores. From 2000 and 1999, the BSE Sensex surpassed 27,000 this year. The NSE Nifty has moved from 850 to above 8,500. And the number of investors has grown fourfold.
In the past 15 years, India's equity markets have witnessed the introduction of dematerialization, derivatives and demutualization of stock exchanges. Add to that the launch of currency and interest rate futures, ASBA facility for investors and more distribution channels for financial products. Commodity exchanges made a debut and now total 3. There are also 3 national stock exchanges. But exchange regulation came under scrutiny as the FTIL-owned NSCL collapsed, taking Jignesh Shah's empire down with it. Former SEBI member and now a securities law professor, J.R. Verma warns that more complex challenges await regulators in the future.
I think one of the areas is with the emergence of new technologies, how markets are changing, and a great deal of disintermediation of certain markets is going on. There are several examples that one can look at. There is the emergence, for example, of robo-advisors, where what is happening is that instead of having a human portfolio manager advising clients about what stocks to buy and how to manage the portfolio, you have a computer algorithm which basically decides what to buy and tells the clients that, you know, these are the trading decisions and these are the portfolios that you must hold. The question that would come is that if there is a problem with that portfolio, then whom would you hold responsible? Whom would you regulate for that kind of an eventuality? Would you say that I mean, you can't hold the computer software responsible, right? You need to have some human being at the end of the day held accountable. So is that the person who wrote the computer code? Is that the organization which ran that computer software on its servers? Is it the person who sold this service to the individual, and so on?
Meanwhile, the corporate debt market story has been promising too, with bond market issuances increasing 7-fold in the last decade. Moving from FERA to FEMA, current account convertibility, partial capital account convertibility, introduction of credit default swaps and repo transactions in corporate debt securities. M&M CFO V. Parthasarthi says India has come a long way in addressing corporate finance requirements. Now, policymakers should move towards total capital account convertibility and frame laws that address the needs of hybrid businesses.
There will be more companies like Alibaba starting with e-commerce but also being like a mini bank. So different industries and different business models are going to emerge. So therefore, the new laws and the new statute will have to see how it takes care of all these environment. So our new laws have to be in line with not just saying a guy in insurance business will do this, but what if a banking and insurance is together? What if a rural business is also along with insurance business?
This holistic approach is sorely missing in India's foreign investment policies too. Yes, in the last 15 years, India has relaxed limits on foreign direct investment across industry sectors, most notably in single and multi-brand retail and more recently in railways and defense. But our suspicion of foreign investors desiring their money but denying them control, imposing complex sourcing restrictions and finally slaying them with tax terrorism has meant India attracts only a fifth of the foreign investment China does. Veteran regulatory expert Vivek Mehra worries this approach will keep India in digital dark age.
E-commerce is for the future. E-commerce is something that you have to live with. And in India, e-commerce is just about, I believe, just 1% of the total market. And therefore, I believe it needs to be encouraged. If it has FDI in it, or if it does not have FDI in it, I don't understand how does it matter. If Indians who have deep pockets can also get into e-commerce, then how does it protect your marketplace? I believe e-commerce can help entrepreneurs sell goods, just as multi-brand retail trading can. If we want to encourage entrepreneurship in this country and manufacturing in this country, the biggest bottleneck for entrepreneur manufacturers is the marketplace. How do they distribute their goods? How do they get it out to the market?
Well, it's impossible to talk about business and foreign investors and not talk about tax. 2012 marked India's most controversial tax law, a retroactive tax on indirect transfers after the government lost its case to tax the Hutch-Vodafone deal. Soon after, India became the first country to impose transfer pricing norms on the issuance of capital, leaving business shell-shocked. BMR's Mukesh Bhutani says effective dispute resolution should be the government's key agenda.
I think India should relook at its treaty policy to embrace mandatory arbitration. I know that the mandatory arbitration concept is prevalent more amongst the OECD nations, but even the UN now is prescribing that countries like India and other emerging markets should embrace mandatory arbitration, which means that if a dispute is not resolved under the MAP process of the treaty, you really resort to mandatory arbitration.
Indirect taxation has seen both change and controversy. Peak customs and excise rates have fallen considerably. In 2005, India introduced value-added tax, and in 2011, service tax made an entry. And now, GST may be in sight. Well, maybe.
We hope that the government will indeed aim for the best, which is to make the GST applicable to the most comprehensive base of goods and services with minimal, if any, exemptions. And the rate should be very modest and low, because the government of India is only collecting 5% of GDP in indirect taxes. And that 5% tax revenue can easily be replaced by the GST rate of something in the range of 10 to 12%. And if the GST is brought in at that level, it can then create opportunities for additional revenues to be raised from indirect taxes by jacking up the rates from 12 to 13, 14, 15. Alternatively, if they make the mistake of bringing in the GST at very high rates, something like 20, 25%, then it will be a stillborn baby.
And finally, what will India's judicial system look like 15 years from now? Well, in the last 15 years, there has been a mushrooming of tribunals, but without adequate resources or appropriate structure. Judicial activism grew, PILs multiplied, corruption came under scrutiny, and so did government policy. Cancellation of 2G licenses, mining bans, coal block deallocations, black money probes. The Supreme Court did some major national cleaning up. But the lack of resources and process has left one big problem unresolved: pendency. Senior advocate Arvind Datar says it should become a national priority.
I would like to have a clean roadmap of what the central government and the state governments are going to do first to tackle the problem of arrears. As I said, out of the 4 million cases pending in the high courts, 50% are just in 4 states. Similarly, out of the 30 million cases pending in the lower courts, 50% are just in 4 states. So I would like a situation where state-specific solutions are thought of. I mean, what is the problem in Allahabad or Uttar Pradesh is quite different from what is in Tamil Nadu. So you will have to have state-specific solutions for tackling the problem of arrears as far as the subordinate courts are concerned. At the High Court and Supreme Court levels, I think I would like greater attention to be paid to a transparent process of judicial appointments. I think the National Judicial Commission will not be a proper answer.
Well, the 15th and final effort at crystal ball gazing comes from none other than the firm team. It's less forecast and more expectation, or should I say hope, that laws, regulations and court orders will be simple, short, better written and easier to understand and comply with. And with that, we'd like to say goodbye to 2014 and welcome 2015. Do remember to tune in to our special first episode of the year next week. We have an exclusive interview with Darius Kambata. This is the very first interview that Mr. Kambata has done in all his life. Happy New Year and see you next week.
And as we bid adieu to 2014, we also have to say a teary bye to our show producer Arun Nair. Here's how he wants to welcome you to the firm in 2015.
Start करना है। आप देख रहे हैं The Firm. Hi साला, thank you for watching The Firm. पहले मैं बहुत मोटा था, फिर मैं फर्म देखने लगा और अब मैं बहुत पतला हो गया हूँ। Thank you for watching The Firm. Bye Menka. Bye bye Suri. Bye.